welcome. This is Peter Winnick. I'm the founder and CEO at Thought Leadership Leverage, and you're joining us on the podcast today, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, my guest is John Rosemberg. John is an author. He's an entrepreneur, and he will tell you some of the other interesting things that he does. But his latest book, or his new book, is called A Guide to Thriving. So welcome aboard, John.
Thank you, Peter. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation and to diving in.
Thanks. So let me ask you one of my favorite questions that I ask pretty often, which is sort of, how did this happen, right? You didn't wake up one day at 5 years old and said, this is what I want to do. Or maybe you did.
Yeah, I did not. I was in the corporate world for over 2 decades, and I climbed the corporate ladder, and, I had achieved everything that I thought I wanted to achieve when I ended up working for a startup. We raised a Series B round of $150 million. We were growing double digits every month, and I was like, I got it. I made it. And I burnt out, and I had never felt so empty
Good.
in my entire career. So one day I had just gotten back from a trip from LA. I had just purchased new facilities for the organization,
Yes.
and I was in a call with a technical team, and the call escalated very, very quickly. And I ended up just shutting off my laptop, shutting off my phone, and I was like, I can't do this anymore. So I went downstairs to the basement, and my kids were playing with Legos, and I just sat there with them and started playing with the Legos. And I realized that I hadn't been present for them for a very long time. And that hit me hard. And I was like, I cannot do this anymore. So 2 weeks
Wait,
later,
so what's worse, being in corporate America or stepping on Legos barefoot?
that's a great question. I'll take the Legos. I'll take the Legos any day. Anyway, so in that moment, I realized I was physically present for them. Like, they
Yeah.
could see me around the house, but I wasn't really there. I wasn't really connecting with them. So this is when I decided to walk away. I went back to school and got my master's in applied positive psychology. And that sent me down the rabbit hole of trying to learn more about thriving. And as I started learning about everything that has come up over the last 2.5 decades, I was just fascinated by the amount of research and information and exploration that there is around this idea of going from survival mode to thriving.
So let me ask you that. So if there's more research, more data available around thriving, are more people thriving today than not?
Well, a recent study by Forresters and Gallup too, they two different studies suggest that only about 1/3 of employees are thriving. So we have about 7 out of 10 employees who are not thriving. Now, does that mean that they're necessarily in survival mode? We don't know, but we know that there's a big gap there in terms of how many people are actually feel like they're thriving.
Got it. So from a wonk standpoint, how are you defining thriving? Because sometimes what happens when you're having conversations with thought leaders is, someone thinks they're talking about X, but they really mean Y. So what is your definition of thriving? What does that look like? What does that feel like?
I love that question. So first, let's define what thriving is not. And I would
Yeah.
argue that for me, thriving is not success. It doesn't mean that you have a big house and a nice car and, would you fly on a private jet? That's not thriving. That's success. And that's a fair definition of success. For me, thriving is this state in which we're calm, connected to others, and we get to be creative. It's a state in which we get to engage our prefrontal cortex, a state in which we get to show up in the world as our authentic selves. That's thriving.
So it sounds to me like maybe it's a first cousin or connected to flow. You can't be in flow if you're
Yes.
not thriving, or that it sounds to me like there's a relationship there.
I would say, and I argue this in the book, that flow is a subset of thriving. It's a form of
Got it.
thriving, right? When we are in flow states, it's likely that we're thriving. Yes.
Got it. Right. Because I'd imagine by definition, you couldn't be in flow state and survival at the same time, biologically.
I haven't seen any research on it, so we can speculate
Yeah.
about it, but I would suggest that probably not. But
Yeah.
hey,
Yep.
who knows? There might be people who are able to do it.
Cool. All right. I want to segue into the business side of this. So this started as a passion project for you, and it's clearly evolved. And you've invested a lot of time and energy, went back to school, wrote the book, etc. What is the current business model for you as a thought leader?
So 10 years ago, I wish I would have had a book like this, right?
Yeah.
I was
For you to read.
in the throes, yes, for me to read, because I was in the throes of being in this perpetual state of survival mode where unless I got a raise or I got a promotion or I got a bigger team or I built a bigger kingdom for the companies that I was working for, I felt like I wasn't enough, right? I felt like I just needed to
Yep.
reach that other milestone in order to prove to myself that I was enough. So I'm not sure how this is going to turn into a business yet, Peter. To be honest, for now, what I know is that me and my partner Lara American, and she's the founder of Lara Bars, we started Anther, which is
Yes.
a firm that it's meant to help organizations find more thriving in their day to day. And what we've been doing is engaging with companies for profit and not for profit that are looking to bring well being as one of their key performance indicators. Companies that consider that their employee well being is a strategic advantage.
Got
And by the way, there was research from Oxford just last year that showed that companies who prioritize well-being and companies in which employees are experiencing more well-being outperform other companies in the market by about 37%. So
Wow.
so the data is really compelling around prioritizing thriving.
Sure. So I want to comment on a couple things you said. So one is, and I've heard this so many times, you wrote the book you needed to read, right? Like, so now why did you do this? Now, some people are writing a book in very deliberately, very strategically from a business standpoint. They know where they sit in the market. They know what the market needs. They know sort of where they're at. They're sort of what I would call mature thought leaders, if you will, in terms of the business side of it. Others are like, I don't know what's going on here, but this has to be done. Period. Full stop. Like one of the reasons I'm on the planet is to document this, and the act of writing the book will help me. And if nobody ever opened it, or if I never hit send to the publisher or whatever, that might be okay too. And then they sort of figure it out. And I think that's interesting, somewhat scary, and they both work out typically, right? But at some point you have to apply a strategy against the serendipity or the intrinsic need to do this.
I agree, and I would argue that I'm closer to the latter than the former in terms of
Yeah.
how I went at this. I'm still kind of, in a way, pinching myself that Wiley picked it up and that now it's going to be published in just like 6 weeks, and it's a big deal. And at the same
Yeah.
time, it's helped me hone into my ability to have faith. And let me define faith, because I think people,
Yeah.
when we hear the voice or the word faith, we usually think about God. I think faith is the capacity to live with uncertainty in the world. And there's been a lot of uncertainty in terms of the process for this book. And in my conversations, as the process has evolved, I've realized that doors are starting to open, right? But I wasn't really hoping that one of those doors would open, or I guess I was hoping, but I wasn't really aiming at any of those doors to open, right? So it's kind of an interesting place to be in, especially as a business leader.
Yeah, I'm sort of a more of a stubborn strategist given what I do, and I would say hope is not a strategy, but I like the way that you're framing it as faith, because that's different than hope, because hope is a bit of uh it's a bit more vague than faith. Like somewhere in your brain, your mind, your heart, your soul, you knew something's going to come of this, right? So that's faith. Hope is a little bit more, I don't know, whooshy to me. But
Broader, yes, and by the way, there's lots of research on how important hope is for thriving and for having well being in our lives. But as you correctly point out, Peter, it's not a strategy. In business, hope can be really helpful in terms for us to kind of jump into the deep end. But ultimately, we do need to chart a path. And one of
yeah.
the things that I suggest in the book is that I talk a lot about agency as
Yeah.
the key to moving from survival mode to thriving. And I define agency as the capacity to make intentional choices.
Yeah.
Uh, and in order for a choice to be intentional, you have to have other choices available to you. And
Mhm.
if you translate that to the business world, that is strategy. What is strategy? Strategy is deciding, looking at all of your options and deciding which ones you're not going to do, right? And
Yeah.
it's an interesting lens with which to look at life.
I love that. So one of the framings that I like to work with when it comes to someone's thought leadership is, okay, let's play a little game. If there was game show music now, we'd cue it up, but we don't have that. The low budget show. What is the benefit of thriving? Because you mentioned a couple things. You mentioned at the organizational level, 37% or whatever, but break it down for me, the benefit of understanding and moving down a path of thriving at the individual level, at the team level, and the organizational level.
So at the individual level is very clear. We get to
Yeah.
engage with the part of us that thinks and process, and we go from being reactive to being proactive. We get to be intentional. And this is incredibly important, especially because a lot of us repeat the same patterns
Right.
over and over
Yeah.
again. And when we lean into our
Right.
agency, we get to break those patterns. So that can be really
Mhm.
powerful. It could mean
Right.
making a huge career change, starting your own company. It could mean marrying somebody else. I don't know, whatever that may look like
Yeah.
for the person for our listeners. At the team level, it means
Wait.
how
I just want to add to. I want to just unpack another component of the individual piece that I wanted to ask. I would imagine for some there might also be a health benefit. If you're in survival mode, the adrenaline's going, the blood pressure's on, you're probably not exercising, eating right. There's probably a whole bucket of just physical stuff that you're putting on yourself that isn't good. Is that so?
yeah. So I would say there's kind of three areas in which we you could see improvements in well-being having a big impact. Your thoughts. So for people who experience a lot of overthinking and a lot of
Yeah.
anxiety, when we're thriving, that decreases.
Uh-huh.
Your emotional life. So for a lot of us, when we were kids, especially for us men, when we were kids, we were taught, you're either angry or happy and everything else in between,
Yeah.
we don't do that. So you can have a richer emotional life, and emotions are really good messengers and they tell us what actually matters in the world. So
Yeah.
it can be really helpful in terms of knowing how to make better decisions in life.
Mhm.
And the point that you're making, it's the body, the sensations in our body and the health of our body. And there's lots of research that suggests that, you know, from your heart health to your, like you said, the cortisol decreases, and we
Yeah.
just we just get to navigate the world in a much less stressful way. So that's at the individual level.
Okay.
Now,
So back to the team level.
back to the team level. I think for teams, what's really important is that I learned in my career after being an individual contributor, starting leading teams and then big teams, I learned that I had to trade productive value, i.e., how productive I was myself,
Sure.
for relational value, i.e., how much I could get other folks to do their jobs in the best way that they could. When we empower teams to do their jobs in the best way that they can, and when they're thriving, we can see how performance actually increases. And by the way, there's lots of research on this. Let's not get into the details of it, but high performers are usually thriving. There's a strong correlation there. At the
That makes sense.
organizational level, what it creates is a lot of adaptability, especially today with AI and hybrid work and all of these new trends that we're experiencing. When we get to engage with all of these changes and all of this complexity and we're thriving, we can actually see a lot of nuance and a lot of we can deconstruct this complexity in a way that allows us to make decisions that are beneficial in the long term for the business.
Love it. Okay. And then finally at the org level, what is that? I mean, and the org level is typically, when I think about it, more aspirational of imagine an organization that was thriving, right? Like you never totally get there, but it's an aspiration to continually get closer to that.
And I would argue that thriving is not like a one state that
Yeah.
you reach and then I did it.
Ring the bell.
The way I describe it The way I describe it is more as a spiral, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes we go up on the spiral and we're thriving, and
Mhm.
sometimes things happen. You know, m- we were talking before starting the recording about the 2000 the show that you recorded with Dan Ariely and
Yes.
how the 2008 crisis. I mean, when something like what happened in 2008 happens, it changes the complete landscape for your business. So your adaptability depends on your ability to thrive through those changes. It depends on your capacity to reframe and understand what is happening in the world in the way that best fits your business. And this is where thriving comes in. It has
Mhm.
a lot of power for organizations, I believe. Yeah.
Excellent. If I were to say to you, let's schedule a time a year from now, and at that point, the book you're going to deem it successful by whatever criteria. What are we going to be talking about?
Hmm. That is a wonderful question, Peter. And my short answer is I don't know. When
Yeah.
this first started, I said numbers of copies sold, and I had
Yeah.
said, oh, then impact, how many people I've reached. And I'm really not sure. like I said, this is the first decision in my life that I have made, professionally speaking,
Yeah,
where I didn't
sure.
actually have a clear outcome in mind, which is very unique for somebody who came from, this was my job. I was in operations, for God's sake. Dashboards were like I every morning I had a flurry of dashboards filling up my inbox, and I would review all the numbers. So to do something like this, it's really a leap into the unknown for me.
Yeah, so that's interesting because you would think once looking at the book, okay, tell me about the type of person that you think wrote this, right? And it wouldn't be those attributes, right? Someone that's an ops person, that's a spreadsheet guy, whatever, that's metrics driven, KPI driven, all those sort of things. You'd probably think more of a what we would call right brain or more fluid, more creative, whatever. So maybe that creativity and fluidity was always there. You
Hey,
know?
Pierre, I started my career in procurement. So exactly, and that's a reaction that I often get. I my One of my claims to fame in my corporate career was negotiation. I knew how to extract the best value in whatever situation I was in. So this has been a tremendous pivot for me, and
All
frankly,
right. So
it's
news flash, like there's hope for all you procurement people that I've dealt with over the years that are just painful to interact with at every step of the way and create sludge and annoyance and add no value to my life. But you've changed, you've reframed my thinking that there's hope for procurement people. We'll get to
I love
actual
that, Peter. Okay, we're done here. That's all we need. The fact that procurement folks get a bad rep, and I think
no, they don't. They earn that rap. They
but
earn it.
being in survival mode is very useful if you are in stressful zero sum situations. It's
Yeah.
really
No.
useful, right? To put yourself in that moment where the adrenaline is rushing and the cortisol and all of this, and you're hyper focused on getting the outcome that you need to get, right? But when that becomes a chronic way of living, when that
Yeah.
becomes your lifestyle, it can be
Yeah.
really problematic. And that was my lifestyle for 40 years, right?
Well,
So
the other thing I'll say in defense, which I never thought I'd say this sentence out loud, in defense of procurement people, based on what you said earlier, they lack agency, right? You can't have a procurement person that says, "Hey, boss, I decided to do this deal and pay them net 2 days, even though our corporate policy is net night." Like they've got, they're very, it's a rigid. They probably have some leeway, obviously, but in terms of agency, I would think of a role that has very, very, very little agency would be procurement.
it's very clear what you're supposed to accomplish.
Yeah.
Lower price, longer payment terms, the best possible legal and business terms that you can get, right? So it is a very zero sum way of looking. Now,
Yeah.
I'll share this with you. The best deals I closed throughout my career were deals where we sat at the table with our vendors, whoever they
Yep.
were. And listen, I work for Sears Canada, which no longer exists.
Yep.
And we did about $550 million worth of deals with IBM. These were highly
Mhm.
complex business process outsourcing deals. And we sat at the table with them for months designing the solution and trying to figure out how we were going to connect whatever we were doing to the success of the business in the long run.
Sure.
And that changed the conversation because it wasn't just about price, right? So
Right. Of
I
course.
think it's an important nuance that sometimes gets lost because we're just reacting to everything that's coming at us throughout the day.
Well, and price is often, an easy, almost lazy metric, right? Because it's almost one that representative of the entirety of a deal. But you can negotiate a great price and bad terms or bad return, whatever. There's so many other variables. Anyway, this has been amazing. I appreciate your time and your transparency, and I wish you the best on your journey there, John.
Thank you so much, Peter. It was a pleasure talking with you.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.